Today we begin our actual journey through the minor prophets of the Old Testament. There's 12 of them, known as the 12 by the Jews and minor prophets by most of us. Again, not because they were unimportant books, they have some significant value, but because they're usually smaller and not as much content. But that's the reason they're minor. Hosea definitely is not minor. Our key word here is going to be faithfulness. And you'll see why as we go through. You see, the Lord called his prophet Hosea to go and marry a harlot. Her name would be Gomer. That's a special girly name. And in verse 2, he says, go take for yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry, for the land commits fragrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer as his wife. So the Lord commands his prophet, as an object lesson to Israel, to go and marry a prostitute, a harlot. And so Hosea obeys his Lord, and he does that. He takes her into his home. Well, the idea then is that he would have taken this woman from the streets, from a life of degradation, brought her into a home, gave her a family. They would have some children together and so forth. And she would so much appreciate what he's done and his love for her and what he's given her, that she would no longer ever want to go back to the old life that she had. But it didn't work that way. After a time, the old ways drew Gomer, and she wanted to go back to her former life. When we pick that up in verse 2 of chapter 2, in the middle, it says, and let her put away her harlotry from her face, and her adultery from between her breast. And then we go on down to verse 5, and it says, for their mother has played the harlot, and she has conceived them as acting shamefully. She's returned to her way of life. Here she had all this benefit of a home life, a loving husband, children, and so forth, but she didn't want it. The old ways drew her, and so she goes back to her ways of prostitution. But the Lord tells his prophet, you're not done with her yet. I want you to go out, and I want you to go bring her back home. And so in chapter 3, he does exactly that. But now he finds her in the slave market. She has apparently sold herself into prostitution. And as a result of that, she's up for sale right now, or somebody wants to sell her or will sell her. And so we find that Hosea goes back and buys his wife out of sexual slavery. In verse 2 of chapter 3, it says, I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver, and a homer and a half of barley. And I said to her, you shall stay with me for many days. You shall not play the harlot. You shall not have a man, so I will be toward you. So he says, look, I'm going to purchase you out of this slavery situation, out of prostitution. I'm going to bring you back home, and I'm going to love you again. I'm going to love you as if you had never strayed, as if you had never sinned. You'll be my wife again. And so Hosea takes her back home. Let me ask you, which would be more difficult? For you to be faithful to a loving, faithful wife, or for you to be faithful and loyal to a straying wife like Gomer, who committed adultery and even prostitution and spurned all your love and all your care for her? What should be more difficult? Well, obviously the answer is to love and be faithful to someone like Gomer. This serves as an object lesson for Israel. God had brought them out of slavery in Egypt. He had brought them into a land for them. He had loved them. He had taken care of them. He had benefited them in every possible way, and yet they constantly strayed back into their idolatry, their spiritual harlotry. And the Lord would keep bringing them back and being faithful to them and loving them, but they continued to stray time and time and time again. But basically, the history of much of the Old Testament is God rescuing them from their sin and them spurning that love and that loyalty and that faithfulness and going right back to their sinfulness. And Hosea gives us the perfect object lesson of what that looks like. As a man who was willing to put up with the prostitution of his own wife because of his faithfulness and love for her. And the whole book of Hosea is about that. And there's some beautiful, beautiful word pictures found here in this book that you ought to read and study about God's love for Israel. But our key verse is going to be found later on in chapter 6. And here it is, verse 6. For I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice. As the Lord calls these people to himself, some of them are still going through rituals. Some of them still did the sacrifices and so forth. And the Lord said, that means nothing to me if you're not faithful, if you're not loyal to me. And so this is our key verse. I delight in loyalty and faithfulness rather than sacrifice. That was God's message to Israel through Hosea. It's God's message to his people today. He wants us to be faithful to him, to be loyal to him. And we should be, for he is our wonderful and gracious and faithful God.